Car balance. Every action you take, from throttle application and trail braking to downshifts and turn-ins, the result of all of that is finding the perfect balance through the corner. When you get it right, to an observer, the car seamlessly flows into the corner, appearing in a neutral state. However, from the driver's seat, it feels like walking on the edge. Not a perfect neutral steer, but a dance between understeer and oversteer, with neutral steer being the end result, as if two forces that act together and cancel themselves out. It's impossible to be really fast without the ability to induce under or oversteer. Good drivers do mistakes all the time, but the difference between them and less experienced drivers is that they're able to correct those mistakes ahead of time. It's like they're sensing what's gonna happen with the car before it happens, and then they can do that micro correction level so that the balance will be the desired one. The secret is to understand how to play with the car balance and how to do it on purpose, how to induce understeer on purpose, how to induce oversteer on purpose, so that the end result will be that neutral steer state that we're aiming for. Understeer happens whenever the car doesn't turn as much as you want to. For example, on entry, if you find that the car just missed the apex, this means you're understeering. Again, on exit, whenever you go back on power and you feel the need to add more and more steering angle to turn the car after the apex, again you're understeering.
The easiest way to see if you're understeering is by observing your steering input, and you can apply this notion called exponential steering. So let's say you're on a straight, you have 0 degrees of steering angle just because you're on a straight, and at some point we arrive at a corner on the braking zone. So for example, here will be the braking, and we have to brake and turn and get to the apex around here. You want to turn initially less, and as the speed decreases, you will turn more and more and more and more towards the apex. This is going to be the exponential steering. However, after the apex, you should unwind the steering wheel and get back to 0 degrees once again on the next straight. What usually happens, and how you would know that you're understeering, is if after the apex you're still asking for more rotation. You see here with the orange line, the maximum amount of rotation was at the apex right here. If you find yourself that you're doing this instead, I'm gonna do it with the red line. This is not ideal. So let's say you have the same approach on the steering wheel up to this part right here. So it's gonna be the same line, but you will continue after the apex to still ask for more. And then you're gonna unwind the steering wheel. If you're gonna do something like this, you're basically asking for more rotation after the apex, which doesn't make sense because the apex should be the point in which you have the lowest speed, and the car will rotate more at its lowest speed. So if you're going past the apex, meaning you're going on the throttle and you're still asking for more rotation from the steering wheel, you're inducing understeer, you're increasing the tire temps, and generally this is gonna be a mistake.
Alright, so let's show an example for that. Let me show you how does it visually look whenever you're turning more after the apex. So we're gonna use this corner from Zandvoort. And now I'm turning more on the exit and scrubbing speed. Let's do it again. Like that. Instead, what you want to do is you want to steer less. You want to have the maximum amount of rotation at the apex, but then steer less and less with the steering wheel and do it more with the trail brake. Let me show you. Notice that I'm not increasing the steering angle after the apex. To induce oversteer, we'll need to use less the steering wheel as a tool of rotation. Instead, we'll use more the brakes, we'll use more the downshift, and we will start to use less and less the wheel to rotate. The rotation is gonna happen with your feet, with your brake, with your initial shift of the weight, but not with the steering wheel. That's the most important thing to start inducing some oversteer.
To induce oversteer, we need two main ingredients. We need firstly some kind of weight transfer. We need to be able to make the rear tires loose, so we need to transfer weight from the rears to the fronts, so that the rear tires will have just a bit less weight, so that the rear will be dancing. And secondly, and this is a secret ingredient that most of the drivers are overlooking, is we need to keep the front tires alive. What I mean by this is that we can't understeer and still be able to rotate with the rears. The fronts have to be under the grip limit. If the fronts will go past the grip limit, it's gonna be impossible to induce oversteer. So these two elements will give you a lot of rotation. Now, how do we do this? For point number one, for the weight transfer, this is gonna be achieved by transferring the weight away from the rear. So it's gonna happen under braking. It's gonna happen initially on entry whenever we're braking harder, because we have a lot more grip, especially in open wheels, but also in GT3s. There's a lot of grip available under initial braking, and that's the first touch of the brakes. That's the first moment in which you will shift the weights from the rear part of the car to the fronts. Now, what happens next in the mid part of the corner under braking, it's exactly the same thing, a continuous weight transferring, that we will try to keep the rears with just enough weight on them that they will still grip, but we need to have that slip angle on the tires. So the braking shape is gonna look something like this. It's gonna depend obviously based on corner, but you will peak hard initially. Let's say you're in a GT car. You will maintain the pressure for as long as you need. If it's a long corner, you have to brake a lot in a straight line, let's say in a hairpin, but then we're gonna start to trail brake into the corner, and then eventually you will be back on power. So what's happening here and how we can induce oversteer is with the brake release. In this part right here, all the way to 0%, this is the part where the rotation happens in the trail brake. So in the trail brake, the magic happens. If you're not gonna trail brake enough, then you won't have enough grip on the fronts, but also you will have a bit too much grip on the rears. You see, it's all about bringing the weight from the rears to the fronts so that the rear will be a bit looser. It's about transferring the weight to make the rears a bit unstable, and also to have a bit more of the weight on the front so that the car can turn. So this is the main idea. This is the trail braking idea, but this is impossible to happen if you're not gonna take into account the second point, which is keeping the fronts alive. So fronts, we need to have the fronts pointing. And what usually happens, and why some people are not able to generate rotation, is because they're trail braking with too much percentages. They're braking too hard on the trail brake, or even initially on the straight line braking, because if you're gonna transfer too much weight, if you're gonna overdo it, so you will add like plus 5% more than you need, then the front tires will start to go past their limit, and you will have too much weight on the fronts to the point that it's not gaining you any more rotation. It's actually losing your rotation. So the idea is to transfer weight from the rears to the front so that the fronts will point. But if you will transfer too much weight, then the fronts won't point as much anymore, and then you will start to rotate less and less and less. And the idea now, with this in mind, is that you have to focus on the braking even more. So this is like the first stage, and if we continue here with the second stage, now that we take into account point number 2, you have to be very mindful of this common mistake. So braking, trail braking versus this one, the orange line, or let's do it with blue. So let's say the red is the ideal, and the blue line is gonna be something like this instead. The difference is just a bit more trail brake into this part right here, and braking here a bit more. So let's say it's like 5% more braking. This is gonna lose you rotation because you will have too much weight on the front tires to the point that it's not gaining you any more rotation. So you will have to minimize the pressure that you're trail braking. You will have to brake less. Trail braking with less percentages most of the time is going to give you more rotation, and this is the common mistake, and this is the most simple way to understand it. You just need two things. You need a weight transfer that's happening with the braking, but you need to keep in mind that the fronts might arrive at a point in which they can't handle that pressure anymore. And even though you don't notice it and the car still feels like it's not rotating as much as it could. So you will try, whenever you're practicing, to find the minimum amount of pressure that you can use in order to make the car rotate. Because even like 3-5% on the brakes, more on the trail brake, or even here in this part initially, can induce some unnecessary heating to the tires, to the surface temperature of the tires, and also will make the fronts go past their limit and lose your rotation.
Check this out. We will achieve oversteer with the brake release and with the steering input. But if we're gonna release the brakes way too quickly, this is gonna happen. So releasing here the brakes way too quickly. Understeering, again, the same thing. Releasing it quickly. We understeer on the exit. If you're just gonna try to still hold the brakes while you're going into the corner in lower percentages, the car will rotate nicely. It will feel at the limit. You just need to stay on the brakes, but in the lower percentages again. See how much the car is rotating? It's now spinning. The problem that we have though with the brake release is that most of the time we think we release to the right amount, but instead we still hold a bit too much the brakes. So for example, I was holding now 8% braking. Can I do it with 3%? Maybe. So this is a question that you can ask yourself. You want to find the minimum amount of trail braking, that's the first thing. And the second thing to generate the oversteer will be, in order to keep the fronts alive, to steer less. You have to steer a few degrees less and force yourself to avoid doing this. So going into the corner and then forcing the steering wheel into the corner. The fronts will just slide if you are steering past their limit. So you're oversteering just because you're understeering just because you're steering too much. Instead, you will aim to barely touch the steering wheel into the corner and doing it with the brakes, not with the steering wheel. So imagine that the steering wheel is frozen and you're doing it with the brakes, and you see you can even spin the F3 car with that if you're focusing on keeping the front tires in check. Now, the last ingredient for achieving more rotation is speed. If we're gonna approach a corner and we're gonna have too much speed, the fronts are instantly gonna slide into the corner and the car won't turn as much. But on the contrary, if we're gonna brake too much and we will slow down the car ahead of time, if we overslow the car on entry, it is very much possible that the car will understeer towards the corner just because the car is very slow at the point and we have to wait for the car to reposition and then to go back on throttle. So it will either delay our throttle application or we will go earlier on throttle and we will understeer by going too early on throttle. Let me show you both cases. Alright, so right now let's say we're gonna brake a bit too late into this corner and we'll carry just a bit too much speed. The car is understeering because there's too much speed going on and obviously the fronts are sliding. This is the most common thing, maybe, but there's a subtle thing to it whenever you're braking more and you go slower into the corner, and let me show you. So braking a lot, and right now we're very close to this curb. If we go back on power, we will understeer on exit. So again, braking hard, meeting the curb early. We can't go on power, so we have to wait instead, like that. This is not ideal, this is not how you should do it. So in both cases you understeer, either because you go earlier on throttle or because you just have to wait until you have to put the power down. And this is very subtle because it's not so obvious. A lot of drivers are braking too much and as a result overslowing the car and then they arrive into understeer. So again, braking too much, now just have to wait, then go back on power. This is understeering. This is not the way to take the corner. Instead, we want to carry more speed, to go with the car a bit more deeper, and then rotating with the trail brake. Let me show you. The car tracking out a bit, and then cutting it back, like that. Not a perfect example, but that's the main idea. You have to carry a bit more speed, and at a point the car will start, just because you have more speed in and you also have a bit of trail brake, you also have a bit of steering angle, the car will start to be sliding from the rears. The secret is to keep the fronts in check, to keep the fronts alive so that you won't overbrake and the front sliding, you won't go very quickly and again the fronts will be sliding. You just want to find the sweet spot of speed and turning angle and braking. But speed and generally the speed that you're taking into the corner, mid-corner more specifically, that's gonna be a big factor in inducing rotation. If understeer is slower, then why would we like to be slower on purpose and induce understeer? The answer is that this is just a mechanism for correcting oversteer. You want to induce understeer just whenever you feel the car is rotating a bit more than you want. So, the default state of the car should be the neutral balance, as we talked in the beginning of the video, but keeping the car in neutral steer at all times just by oversteering to the perfect amount every time, every moment, each phase of the corner is going to be impossible. So you need to be able to have the ability to correct that small oversteer with slightly moments of understeer.
Now let's say we're taking a corner, and if we really zoom in on the telemetry of a good driver, we would see something like this on the brake shape. Initial braking. I'm over exaggerating it right now, but those micro corrections are really helpful to understand this concept. So this is, let's say, a very zoomed in on the brakes. Let's say it's 10x zoom. so we see all the little details in the shape. Every moment you're gonna see a dip like this one, this one, this one. So every little dip in the shape is a moment in which the driver is trying to induce oversteer with the brake release. So oversteer happens whenever you're doing the brake release because you're trying to keep the speed of the car up. So we're trying to maximize speed by doing the release. Also, we're balancing the car and we're trying to use less weight on the fronts so that the fronts will still alive. So again, tying to that concept of keeping the fronts alive. So with the brake release, we are doing this. Every moment though in which we are reapplying the brakes, like here, here, same here in this example, and same here, and so on. These are all moments in which we are inducing understeer. And we do this so that we can balance the car, because right now, whenever we induce this kind of oversteer with this brake release, the speed of the car is higher. So it feels like, oh damn, the car is gonna snap. I'm really at the limit, very close to going past the limit. So because this moment appears, then we correct it with applying more brakes. But then it happens again and again and again and again and again. And naturally it's gonna be more like a staircase. What's gonna happen if you will really zoom in to something like this? It will be like this. Like a staircase going in, and that's how you stay at the limit, at a very knife edge limit of grip, by balancing the oversteer moments with understeer moments and inducing this kind of understeer. That's one of the way that you can do it with the brakes. So you're gonna apply just a bit more of the brakes, so you will induce a bit of understeer. Another way in which you can induce understeer is by steering a bit more. So you can still maintain mostly the same brake release, but if you're gonna add more steering while you're doing your brake release, for example 5 degrees more steering, you can induce some understeer to balance the car. You can also do it by your downshifts. So let's say your initial downshifts were like this, each line representing a downshift. You can induce a bit of understeer if you delay your downshifts. So let's say, for example, this 2 is giving you too much oversteer. You will shift them a bit more to the right. So we will delay them a bit more so that you can induce some understeer by downshifting a bit lazier at some stage in the corner. So you have the downshifts, you have the steering wheel, and you have the brake release. These three and the combination of those three, or maybe just a single one for a corner, will help you to induce some understeer. And again, inducing understeer will be key to maintaining the car at the limit, because if you're just gonna induce oversteer, at some point you will go past the limit and you will either spin or you will have to do a very big correction that's gonna lose time.